Blessed is the man who walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is on the law of the Lord, and on his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. Welcome to the Bread of the Word podcast, a podcast striving to feast on God's Word and let the Bible speak to us all. Let us, as a former generation said, go ad fontes to the fountain and be nourished and sustained by all that God is. Let's dig in together. Hello and welcome back to the Bread of the Word podcast, where we go ad fontes to the fountain, to the Word of God, to be nourished and sustained by all that God is, as He's revealed Himself to us. My name is Tyler, and we are continuing our trek through the book of Job. We're going to be finishing chapter 26 this one day. And Job is responding, as we've seen, to the same old accusations from his so-called friends about his level of sin. That he has incurred the suffering that he has because he sinned. That is the argument they've made time and time again, and they will continue to make this argument until we get to the end of the book, essentially. But as we continue working through the statements of Job, we come to this portion of Job 26. I'm starting in verse 5. He's already basically said that these spirits, or that is the essence behind the arguments that Bildad has made, are not in accordance with God. That's some other spirit, so to speak, by which you speak. But verse 5, picking up after that statement, he says, "Dead things are formed from under the waters, and the inhabitants thereof. Hell is naked before him, and destruction hath no covering. He stretches out the north over the empty place, and hangeth the earth upon nothing. He bindeth up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not rent under them. He holdeth back the face of his throne, and spreadeth his cloud upon it. He hath compassed the waters with bounds, until the day and night come to an end. The pillars of heaven tremble, and are astonished at his reproof. He divideth the sea with his power, and by his understanding he smiteth through the proud. By his spirit he hath garnished the heavens. His hand hath formed the crooked serpent. Lo, these are parts of his ways, but how little a portion is heard of him. But the thunder of his power who can understand?" And so this is essentially broken down into three sections. We're going to go through that accordingly. The first section is a widening of the scope. That while Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar have pretty well hammered on the idea that God is powerful, that God is just, it with respect to Job's suffering, almost as if he is being retaliatory, Job takes the idea of God's power and spreads out the scope a little bit. He widens the view a little bit. That we just zoomed out the camera a tad to have a less detailed but more all-inclusive picture of what it means that God is sovereign and that God is in control. And so he starts off going back to creation, talking about the things that are formed out of nothing, that he has divided the sea with his power, that he has compassed the waters with bounds until the day and night come to an end. He bindeth up the waters, that he does all these things, and this is straight out of Genesis. This is like a transparency sheet that you could put on top of Genesis, and it matches. And truthfully, Job, I believe, came first as far as what was written down with Job. And so I believe that, more accurately, Genesis gets its language from Job, rather than Job gets his language from Genesis. Now, while Genesis chronologically happened first, Job was likely the first book to be written. Scholars believe as much. And it is my take, it is my stance on the book of Job, that Job came first, and that Job has provided for the people of God a sort of Rosetta Stone, that it gave them the language with which they address God, with which they think about God. And that's why statements like this in Job 26 are so important, because this is the beginning of the phrasing with which they describe the works of God later on. When we get to Genesis 1, and we see about God dividing the waters and separating the light from the dark, it starts with Job. It starts with Job. Job is in Genesis, and Genesis is in Job. And so we start off with this broadening of the scope to consider the works of God in nature, in creation. It says in Psalm 19 that the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. The idea that Job is testifying to is that the God of nature is his God. That he has not abandoned the God who is all-powerful, the God who is sovereign. He has not forsaken this in any way. That though Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar have made accusation after accusation about his alleged apostasy, saying that his suffering is a sign that God is angry with him, Job doubles down and says, my God is the God who is sovereign over the sea and the land, and yet I still suffer. And it's okay. It'll flesh it out a little bit more, and we'll deal with some more of the big feelings associated with that in a later episode. But right here, Job's focus is on the magnanimity of God. He does not deny that it is God who smites the proud. It is God who binds up the waters in the clouds, that holds back the face of his throne. He's not denying any of this. If anything, he actually believes it. Because Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar have been very quick to presume about how God operates, about what God would do in this scenario, what God must be like because of what we've assumed about him. And here Job says, this is what God actually did. It goes back to creation. It says, this is what God did. And this is the God that I believe, not the God of my presumptions, but the God of history, of the happenings. And so Job stakes his belief, first and foremost, on who God is and what he did. Who he is, hell is naked before him, and destruction hath no covering. It says in Hebrews chapter 4 that all things are naked to him, that there is nothing hidden from his sight. Hearkening back to this passage right here, that hell is naked before him, not even something as permanent from our sense as death and the grave is hidden from God. But it is all before him. And this harkens back as well to the beginning of the book. If we go back to Job 1, we find Satan. And he talks to Satan. The God, Almighty God, God who is perfectly good, who is the highest and most perfect good, talks to Satan. What? And he does this, and it says that there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And there have been a lot of debates, and there's a lot of lofty theology you can get into, and you can get on YouTube and find this stuff out and find 18 different rabbit holes about what exactly that means. But essentially, even Satan is obligated to stand before God. Satan, who in many ways is the embodiment of evil and rebellion against God, has no choice but to go before him and stand in his presence. And likewise, hell is naked before him. There is nothing hidden from his sight. He stretcheth out the north over the empty place, and hangeth the earth upon nothing. He bindeth up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not rent under them. The God is God. And good and bad is before his face. Good and evil is bound to his existence. He holds the whole world in his hands. And the second part of this is in verse 13, when it says, by his Spirit, because we back up to the beginning of the chapter, Job answers and says, whose spirit came from thee? Talking of Bildad. But it says, of God, he says, by his Spirit he hath garnished the heavens. His hand hath formed the crooked serpent. God has formed the crooked things. That is the testimony of Job in this verse. Though God has made the heavens, he's made the earth, he's made the sea and the land, and he's suspended everything by the word of his power. It also says that he has made the crooked things. One of my favorite verses in the entire Bible is Ecclesiastes 7:13. It says, consider the work of God, for who can make that straight which he hath made crooked? And there are times where God makes things crooked, where God intentionally makes things difficult, where he makes things uncomfortable, where he draws a crooked line with a straight stick. For no other reason than because he's willing. Because the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. And so God has the prerogative to make things crooked sometimes. And he does. And he made the serpent that would deceive Eve. He made the serpent through which deception came and Adam sinned. God made the serpent. He also made the wood that would be made into a cross, fashioned for Christ's death. The soldiers that would nail him to that cross, God the Father provided for their needs every day, nurtured them from the time they were a baby, so that they could nail his beloved Son to a cross. So that God the Father could pour out his justice upon Christ. God did that. And so though he has made the heavens and the earth, he is also the maker of the crooked things. And the crooked things have a purpose. The suffering of Job has a purpose. And Job will wrestle with what that purpose is through the entire book. And he does not, I don't think, come to a truly all-inclusive, all-encompassing answer for that. But at the end of the day, God hath formed the crooked serpent. And that's okay. God makes things crooked sometimes, and it's okay. In the church, we talk a lot about weakness. We talk a lot about suffering. We talk a lot about being lowly. That there is strength in weakness. That there is blessing in weakness. If we go to the very words of Christ, in Matthew chapter 5 even, we go to the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 5 verse 2, and he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the people who are spiritually bankrupt. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall receive comfort. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the people that don't have it all together. Blessed are we who recognize what we do not have, is essentially what Jesus is saying. Is there is a blessing in that which we do not possess within ourselves. There is a blessing and coming to the end of ourselves and coming to the end of our rope and recognizing that God will sustain the needs that we ourselves can't fill. There is a blessing in interdependence. There is a blessing in dependence. We are not truly independent when it comes to the things of God. We need God. We need His peace. We need His power. We need His presence. And those are not things we can secure for ourselves, but those are things that God provides. Just as He was able to provide a world, as He was able to hold the planets in orbit around the sun, so He is able to provide us peace. If God is able to make the universe, He is certainly able to make me still, as 4 days of insomnia has taught me, is that God can make me still. In verse 14, lo, these are part of His ways. But how little a portion is heard of Him. But the thunder of His power, who can understand? That despite all this, despite all that Job has professed about the power of God, this is but a fraction of what can be known about Him. This is a fraction of what He's capable of. This is a fraction of what He is. And of this fraction that we have to work with in the Bible will stump us and stymie us and challenge us all the days of our life. Because we can't know everything. We cannot know everything about God. But what we can know about God, God has given to us. Deuteronomy 29:29 says that the secret things belong to the Lord, but that which hath been revealed belongeth to us and to our children. Why? That we would do the things in His law, that we would walk with God, that we would do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. That was the goal of giving us this information in the first place, was to give us Himself, was to bring us into fellowship with Him. That is the purpose of giving us the Bible, was to bring us into fellowship with the Creator of the universe. Flip over to Jonah. Look at Jonah, chapter 1. Jonah's on a boat. He's down sleeping in the lower decks, and there's a raging storm, the kind of storm that makes seasoned sailors panic and cry out to their gods. It says that every man was crying out to their own god. All these pagan sailors. And at one point, they become persuaded that Jonah is at fault for this, which he was. And they ask him, what is your occupation? Who are you? What do you do? Of what people are you? And Jonah says, I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, which hath made the sea and the dry land. Then were the men exceedingly afraid, and said unto him, why hast thou done this? And so he says, I fear the Lord. Which we could debate whether or not that's entirely true, because he was running from God. As Herman Melville once beautifully put it, he thinks a ship made by man will take him to countries where God does not reign. But he says, I fear the Lord. And who is the Lord? The God of heaven, which hath made the sea and the dry land. And it says that they were exceedingly afraid when he said that. And his solution was, cast me into the sea, and the seas will become calm. And that is exactly what it says. So they took up Jonah and cast him forth into the sea, and the sea ceased from her raging. And so Jonah set out to calm the storm as a means of escape. That even if he was to be lost to the ocean, he would still not have to obey God. He would still escape going to Nineveh. But if we compare that with Luke chapter 8, my mistake, not Luke, it's in Mark chapter 4, when Jesus calms the storm. It says, there arose a great storm of wind, and the waves beat into the ship, so that it was now full. And he, being Jesus, was in the hinder part of the ship, asleep on a pillow. And they awoke him, and said unto him, Master, carest thou not that we perish? And he arose, and rebuked the wind, and said unto the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said unto him, Why are ye so fearful? How is it that ye have no faith? And they feared exceedingly, and said one to another, What manner of man is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? Parallels with Jonah quite intentionally. That Jesus and Jonah were both asleep in the lower parts of the boat. They were marked, they were brought up to deal with the problem. But Jonah set out to calm the storm as a means of escape, while as Jesus calmed the storm out of compassion. And it was a testimony that he was who he said he was, that he was the God who made the sea and the dry land, that the wind and the waves obey him. And this is the God that Jonah has faith in. This is the God that Job is looking to. Who holdeth back the face of his throne, who divides the sea with his power, who smites the proud. By his Spirit he hath garnished the heavens, his hand hath formed the crooked serpent. These are parts of his ways, and how little a portion is heard of him. But the thunder of his power, who can understand? This is the God of Job, and this is the God who has made himself available to us through the person and work of Christ. Though he is a God of power, he is also a God of great compassion, who has made himself known to us that we would love him, that we would walk with him, that we would find peace in him. That just as he calmed the storm in Jonah and in Mark, so he calms the storm inside us. And he says to your heart today, peace, be still. Thank you for listening. This has been the Bread of the Word podcast. Bread of the Word is a podcast ministry striving to feed people the wonderful words of God, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse, striving to let the Word speak for itself. This ministry is also a member of the Truth and Love Network, a diverse fellowship of fellow podcasts of different theological backgrounds, united in the gospel of God. For more from the Bread of the Word podcast or the Truth and Love Network, check out the links below and follow us on social media. Until next time, God bless. Matthew 4:4.